Welcome to NASP Dialogues. The Dialogue podcasts focus on events and issues in school psychology. I'm Brian McKevitt, NASP Communications Committee member, Nebraska delegate, and moderator of our current dialogue. Today we're discussing Tweet, using social media to advance advocacy efforts. Joining us are Peter Faustino and Carrie Oyen. Would you mind just introducing yourselves?
No, not at all, Brian. I'm Dr. Peter Faustino, delegate from New York, and a fine member of the GPR, Government and Professional Relations.
And I'm Dr. Carrie Oyen, and part-time, I am a GPR co-chair. I'm also an assistant professor of school psychology at the University of South Dakota, and very excited to be here today to chat with you a little bit more about some of the things that we're excited about.
Great. Well, our talk today is about using social media for advocacy efforts in school psychology. So maybe just start out with a general overview. What are your thoughts on the role of social media for advocacy for a school psychologist?
Yeah, I mean, Carrie and I are pretty passionate about the topic, and we're really of the mindset that if you're going to be doing professional advocacy in today's day and age, you have to be using social media. And there's a whole bunch of different forms to use it, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, podcasting is something we're now exploring a little bit of. So.
And really finding the space that you can communicate with people and share your message so that they can hear it and take a look at what best practices look like. I think school psychologists certainly we're a smaller profession, and so anytime that we can get out in a larger arena to talk a little bit more about some of the things that we're doing, some of the work that we're advancing, we really feel like it's a really powerful tool for us to use.
Well, some of our conversation today will be really focused, I think, for state leaders or state associations. Individual practitioners can amplify their voice either professionally in government and professional relations, or even sometimes just in branding, just getting the message out about how important mental health is for children.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Do you have a specific story when social media led to an open door for professional advocacy?
Carrie and I were talking about this before we got here, and we have countless stories.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a powerful medium that I think sometimes we even surprise ourselves when we're involved in these. I mean, the two I'd love to share, one is GPR gets asked to go to do state trainings quite frequently. And I was in the state of Utah at a training with many of their school psych leaders. And we were talking about barriers to different work that they were doing in Utah. And they identified the PTA, the Parent Teachers Association, as one of the more influential groups in the state of Utah, but not really having any access to them. Mm-hmm. And so our idea was, right here at this table, let's open up our Twitter accounts and start tweeting what it is we're doing, saying that the Utah Association of School Psychologists believes in mental health for children, or just other types of themes and topics. And literally, within 10 minutes of us tweeting, someone shouted out, "Oh my goodness, the PTA is retweeting and replying to what we're saying." And maybe 2 minutes later, there was a direct message through Twitter that said, "Hey, really love the topics that you guys are talking about. How do we partner on these things?" That was about 2 years ago and has actually led to the Utah PTA and School Psych Association now doing a joint conference, several joint papers, and some legislative work.
Yeah.
So.
Wow.
It's pretty cool to see those connections form. I have similar stories. One of my personal stories is that I talk a lot about rural mental health. I grew up in a town of 300 people. I live in rural South Dakota, and I oftentimes have a hard time getting that message out. People kind of close their eyes and they have a vision of what rural South Dakota might look like, and it's probably a little true. But I also think that there's kids that need us, kids that need access to mental health services, and I started to tweet about that. And I remember I put the tweet, and it was a hashtag Rural Matters. And I'd kind of taken it from a mental health matters kind of perspective. Well, it turns out that there's a Rural Matters podcast that I was unaware of. And when they saw the hashtag Rural Matters, they contacted me directly on Twitter, and they said, "We would really like to have you as a featured guest because we are really trying to find ways to talk about mental health in rural settings." And so that ended up opening that door, ended up doing a podcast for them, and really got connected with the National Rural Education Association, again, all through social media.
In New York, our state association has its own Twitter account, separate from individuals who do a lot of this work, and we're always trying to gain access to different legislators. And in particular, there was one state senator who was the chair of the mental health committee that we had been visiting, meeting with staffers, emailing, which probably goes to a few thousand emails that they receive on any given day. But he was tweeting some information about mental health, and we used our state association Twitter account to start replying and saying things like, hey, we'd be happy to support that legislation or that bill. Well, again, he sends a direct message to that account that says, who would I contact to get your letter of support? And immediately, almost like a texting. It's tweeting direct message, but it's almost like you're texting directly with the state senator, which I think Carrie and I find that when you begin to become proficient with this, you really have a level of access, unlike any other form of media that we've discovered.
Wow, what amazing stories, just of opening doors through a tweet.
Yeah.
Wow. So what are some of the core components of effective advocacy on social media?
When we talk a lot about this, we do think that it's really important to have a strong message. One of the things that we talk about is creating a social media strategy. And so that doesn't mean that we're not authentic. Things that I tweet about, things that I talk about on my social media platforms are things that are important to me. So really the first thing we talk about is setting your objectives, really thinking about those matters that are critical. So when I think about myself, I think about mental health. I think about mental health in rural areas. I also think about the professional shortages of school psychologists. We have a pretty significant issue of professional shortages in my rural state of South Dakota. And so again, instead of being about everything, I think it's really important to be a little more selective and set those objectives. And then also think about who you want to reach. What's the audience that you're looking to reach? We talk a lot about being very mindful to tag certain groups or certain people. We even talk about how when you are tagging someone, if you want all of their followers to also see your tweet, you put a period in front of the @ sign to their Twitter handle, and that actually makes it so that anybody that follows them can also see your message. And so again, be thinking about not only those who are aligned with you, but also those that might not be aligned with you, because again, it could be this kind of open door.
Yeah, and Carrie mentioned about defining the message, and I think we get a lot of questions about how do I create the right tweet to get attention. And sometimes what we will let people know is that you can do it at multiple levels. You can go on a platform like Twitter and simply retweet or like other people's messages that you think are aligned with your vision or mission or your message. And that at the most basic level expands the horizon and lets people know that you're sort of active. From there, you can select or compile specific resources. NASP has a whole bunch of wonderful resources that you can hyperlink to, share out, everything Carrie just said about using the right hashtags or tagging the right groups. And then beyond that, you can sort of really get engaged in the conversation by finding ways to reply or comment or expand the conversation. And we find that there's a couple levels of getting involved in something like this, but it's also for every range from beginner to advanced. So anybody listening to the podcast shouldn't say like, well, that sounds really complicated, because you could just start slow and start liking and retweeting some things.
And we talk a little bit about things like if you have an article that you've read and you love it, think about how you could take one little quote out of that article and have that be your message. Maybe retweet with comment and you have a little message. The other thing that we talk a lot about in our advocacy message is having pictures. Pictures is one way to grab people's attention. It tends to get a lot more interaction. That's why you tend to see people that are doing marketing, they oftentimes include a picture in their message. So again, I think you want to be clear, you want to be concise, and that's how you get that perfect message. So we only have 280 characters on Twitter, so you have to be kind of creative, which there's something about it that I kind of like. The other thing to think about is what kind of social media platform makes the most sense for you. And so when we think about some of the messaging for policy, when we think about trying to communicate with our politicians, what we know is that many politicians have Twitter accounts. And so it's not so hard to find your senator on Twitter. It's a little bit more challenging to navigate that space with Facebook. It also, they tend to, some of them have Instagram accounts. It tends to be that, especially when talking about policy things, we tend to recommend Twitter. It was interesting that Twitter users tend to be more young and urban than Facebook users. And then Pinterest is kind of an interesting thing that they tend to be more women. Sometimes people put out different things. Now, I like Pinterest for my recipes and some of my crafting ideas, but I also think that there can be some important messaging there. So again, I think it's better to pick one or two social media platforms rather than kind of being all over every place. So that's kind of what we would probably recommend. Again, thinking about which platform is the most effective. We know that at the top of the heap, YouTube and Facebook are quite high on there. And then we have a marketing person at my university, and she keeps telling me that, because I love Facebook so much, and she keeps telling me that Facebook's a little bit of a grandmother thing now. And I said, but I love it. And what's been interesting is that they've been finding that the students that are coming into the university are really into Instagram. The problem with Instagram is that you have to be following a person to be able to get access to that information. And so we've been really finding that it's good to think about the platform that you're using, again, the audience, especially decision makers. And again, we really, we kind of like Twitter, we can't help it.
So,
Hence the title.
So you talked a little bit about starting slow for people who are new to it, or thinking about what platform they're most comfortable with. And I would have never even thought that Pinterest could be used in this method. But are there other tips that you have for people who are new to advocacy with social media?
I'm being reminded of a couple stories where some of our strongest advocates have actually connected to the people, the stakeholders or the decision makers, on just other topics besides what the social media message or strategy is. So I'm thinking of somebody that I know who was targeting a particular legislator and saw that legislator, whether it be on Facebook or maybe Pinterest or maybe even on Twitter, was talking about Prince, the musician. And so he started replying with some songs and some links and liking some of those things. And the next thing you know, there's a little bit of a friendship that sort of forms around Prince. I've seen it happen with, sports teams. In New York, it's the Rangers, but in South Dakota,
Well, it's the USD Coyotes, if you're asking me.
And when this sort of shared experience occurs, I feel like it sort of is easier to have a conversation. I think it reminds us that even though we have these sort of online, almost informal types of modes of communication, that we're still people behind the screens and behind the phones. And if you can find a way to connect with that individual, that sometimes that's a very powerful tool as well.
Yeah, I've really been finding, I live in a state that maybe would not be classified as really prioritizing mental health for children. And what I've been finding is that I try to target the message that policymakers is sending out that aligns. So right now we have an opioid crisis in our state, and it's really important to our governor. Well, I guarantee that those adults that are struggling with opioids, a majority of them have children. And so I try to connect this idea of we want to stop opioid abuse, and we want to, really try to target intervention. But let's think about those kids that are living in those houses of parents that are struggling with substance abuse. And so I think really being mindful of hearing someone else's story and then figuring out how you, as a school psychologist, can connect our message and our story to theirs. And all of a sudden it might seem, that we're miles apart, but we might not be so far apart. And so I think that's probably been my most beneficial message with social media.
And the only other thing maybe I'm thinking about is just how to be respectful on social media as well. I mean, unfortunately, there's so much hate and anger, and I think, we talk about it with children, but it's too easy to take, your reactive thought or emotion and just tweet it out. And sometimes we have leaders that are doing those or modeling it in such a bad way. So I think the only other bit of advice I would be is, don't use any of the platforms in that method. Restrain yourself, count to 10, maybe take a day, take an hour, and just be thoughtful and try to remain positive with all of your messaging. There's really no winning, an argument online. So.
Well, we kind of like to say, this is a little South Dakota term, but sometimes we like to say it's a little easier to get a bear with honey than vinegar. And so sometimes I think it's really good for us to think about how we can be kind and how we can say we might disagree, but here's some common ground and here's how we can advance what's important to both of us.
I really like honey.
So do I.
That's very good.
I love it.
That's great advice, and I'm curious about just increasing engagement. So you mentioned photos. You mentioned you have your message be kind and amicable. What are some other ways to increase engagement on social media?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we talk about, especially with Facebook, again, we think messages that are short and sweet get the highest engagement. Having a monologue might not be the most effective way for you to get your point across. So again, thinking, even if it is an article, linking the article, but then taking a little bit of a quote out to really draw people in. We also talk about making it visual. So again, we talked about some of those ways that you can do that. Post regularly. Now, not too much. Some people post all day long. That's too much. But thinking about how you can be a regular presence, like here I am again, and trying to kind of post again about the same kind of topics. Activate your biggest fans. Like people who you like, and retweet and share things that people that you are aligned with share. That can be a really great thing to kind of build your brand.
We might have to shout out to the NASP Twitterati right now.
We do like the NASP Twitterati.
Carrie and I last year did this presentation at NASP about using social media for advocacy, and we wanted it to be sort of organic and in the moment, and somehow as a collective group in the audience, we came up with a new hashtag, the NASP Twitterati, and it's stuck, and it's been tweeted and retweeted, and here at this conference, we've actually had the pleasure of meeting a lot of those, Twitter friends, I will call them.
I think we're friends.
Yeah, we're definitely friends. And they have shared with us that it's given them a connection, a group, a voice that maybe they would have been a little bit quieter about, but we sort of opened up that pathway for them. And it's been really fun for Carrie and I to think about that.
Well, and they look a little different than their tiny little picture on social media. So last night we were at the welcome party, and somebody came up to me and they were like, "Hey, we're friends on Twitter." And I said, "We are friends on Twitter." And it was fun because I think it's also allowing a place for people that might not be as extroverted, people that are more introverted but have a really powerful message. I think that it allows this space for them to be a part of our community. And so, again, we really feel like it's this place that allows it to be inclusive and allows us to kind of build this message. Again, I think we talk a lot about using those right hashtags.
Yeah. So, Brian, if you don't use Twitter, do you use Twitter?
Are you a Twitter?
You're inspiring me to dust my
gosh.
Twitter account off and do it more.
This is
but
very exciting.
Currently not
like
really
inspire.
active.
This is great. So, what Carrie's referring to is check your hashtags. Because there's so much being used on social media now. You may think a hashtag sounds really cute and fun, but it may have been hijacked by another group, and you don't want to misuse a hashtag. It could be a little embarrassing for you or for them.
It could be. Now tell people, for people that are not familiar with hashtags, tell them what's happening when you hashtag something on Twitter.
So two things. One, the hashtag really hyperlinks so that you could click on it and then follow that message. So you gave the example of mental health matters. If you wanted to know who else is talking about mental health today at this moment, you just click on that hashtag and it opens up a whole series of tweets, anywhere on the Twitterverse to sort of let you know what's going on. The other part of that is really that it was an analogy that a friend gave me about what exactly is Twitter, and he described it or used an analogy of like a beer hall. Like you go into this really loud room, there are people everywhere, you really don't know where to start, but you sit down at one table and you have a conversation at that table. And then when you're done, you can get up and move to a different table and have a completely different conversation. Well, using hashtags allows you to sort of identify what table am I at right now having what conversation.
So you can be both about mental health and the USD Coyotes. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
Those are probably the biggest tables I sit at.
What are some of your favorite hashtags?
We like talking about that. Well, I do. I love mental health matters because I do think that mental health certainly matters. Our favorite one, though, when it comes to tweeting things that are related to NASP and related to advocacy, we really like the hashtag NASP advocates. I try to make sure to put those on much of my work that's really trying to influence policy. Again, anytime you're doing active work, trying to engage policymakers and community stakeholders, we really encourage you to use that.
Obviously here at this convention, NASP 2020 is quite popular. And then huge shout out to our social justice warriors who created a great hashtag, which is SP4SJ, which stands for School Psychologists for Social Justice. And if you follow that hashtag, there's some really remarkable stuff coming out there around the social justice strategic goals. So.
And again, we can't help it, but we love our NASP Twitterati. So hashtag NASP Twitterati. You should know that it's Twitter with 2 T's. Ati just says 1 T. And that can get you connected to our community, our little Twitter community that really engages with a lot of these conversations.
And then some of the bigger mental health groups that are out there, like End the Stigma, Save Our Care, Invest in Kids. Sometimes when you just, follow a bunch of different people on Twitter, you can kind of find some really great hashtags.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yep.
Great. What has been the most surprising connection you've made through social media?
Oh, that is a good question. I think that, so for me, honestly, some of my most surprising, but probably some of the most exciting connections I've made are actually with researchers. I can't help it. I feel about researchers how other people feel about pop stars. Like, I really get excited about peer-reviewed research and people that are engaging in this really big work. And so it was kind of funny. We were just walking down the hallway, and I saw one of my Twitter kind of pop stars, but he's mostly a researcher, Dr. Stephen Shaw. And it's been so fun because it helps you to connect, and so that's been surprising for me. What he likes to tweet about is research, best practices in school psychology, and coffee. And I have a shared love of all those things. And so I think that's probably been the most surprising thing for me, is that I find like it's not always just about trying to retweet an article. I actually find that sometimes there's just some lighthearted things that says, I'm an academic, and being an academic is sometimes it's a bit of a lonely job. And so it's fun to know there's other people out here trying to advance our mission. They're sitting in front of their keyboards trying to write research articles, just like me. And so that might be one of the most surprising things I've noticed with some of my connections.
Mine is probably less professional and just
professional.
more fun. But when I'm on Twitter and I'm doing something fun and I take a picture and I tweet it, I love when I get a follow or a retweet or a like. And so, Brian, have you ever had a stroopwafel?
Oh, geez, Louise.
No, I've not.
Stroopwafels are just Dutch delicacies.
They're pretty high end.
Yeah,
Yes.
and they have a very active social media presence. So if you, post a picture of a stroopwafel, they will follow you, they will like you, they will communicate with you, and it just makes me feel a little extra special while I'm eating it. I'm also a big coffee drinker, Nespresso.
I do think that Nespresso people have a pretty strong fondness for
We're a little
Dr.
bit like a
Faustino
cult,
here.
and they Nespresso Global follows me, and I think that's pretty cool.
I think that's pretty cool. I
Yeah.
kind of like the International Delight Coffee Creamer people.
Oh,
I feel like they understand me.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
some of those are just kind of fun, I think. And it actually just, again, it says that you're not so far away from the people that are on social media.
We're sort of the work hard, play hard group.
Well, and what's so interesting is that you can make connections with people you otherwise wouldn't make connections to.
Exactly.
That could be so powerful in the advocacy realm, but also just for your own personal social satisfaction, right? So my last question is maybe a little bit more difficult. I don't know, but what are ethical and legal obligations for public school employees with regard to advocacy using social media?
Oh, I love this question.
Yeah.
So I can't help it. I wrote a paper about it because I loved it so much. But we talk a lot about how sometimes people feel that, because I'm a public school employee, then I better not engage in advocacy because I don't want to get in trouble with my employer, because we are both a public school employee as well as certified school psychologist. And so we've did some time exploring this topic, taking a look at case law, taking a look at our ethical code. And what we really find is that, first of all, we have to know that individuals can speak on matters of public concern. Individual people, we always can. Even if you are, wherever you're employed, you can always say, I'm here and I'm advocating for this matter based on my my individual opinion and on a matter of public concern. The other thing that I think is really, really cool, and I know, Brian, that you've spent some time with me rewriting the standards. We have our practice model standards, and we have our new 2020 standards that hopefully will be passed and then coming out. And really, we spent a lot of time highlighting the role of advocacy, saying that that's one of our core features of being a school psychologist. We are to advocate and be a voice for those who have no voice. And I think that when we use our advocacy, when we use social media, as long as we're really conveying that message, we really are aligning with our mission. We do have tips. For example, we say, let's not use our school email. Instead, create another email, perhaps a Gmail account. Certainly there are times, I testify in our state legislative body, and before I testify, I say I'm here on my own, regard. My opinions may or may not reflect the Board of Regents. We have some statements that we make, but it doesn't mean that we can't still share our voice, because as certified or licensed school psychologists, we really have an important voice that might not otherwise be heard, because I think we have such a unique perspective in that we are the educators that know the most about psychology and the psychologists that know the most about education. And I think that space is so important for us to explore. Legally, there's been a lot of cases out there. Even cases of people, one of my favorites is this Settlegood case that they ended up, it was a PE teacher, I think a substitute teacher, and the story goes that this person saw that this IEP wasn't being implemented and kind of was a whistleblower, basically, and said some things were not happening that should be happening. Ended up getting fired. Ended up this person, I think they kind of picked the wrong person to mess with, because this person ended up going to court and saying, I was wrong. It was wrong for you to fire me for doing this. And ended up that this person was wrong. It was found that it was wrong, that you do have whistleblower protections because you are the person that's in the school and you should speak on behalf of those who can't speak for themselves. So again, know that we have to honor, of course, the policies that are set by our employer, but know that doesn't mean we still can't share our voice. Just maybe don't tweet during the day at school.
And I do agree with everything Carrie said, and maybe just add as a practitioner that idea of, know your own school culture. I mean, so many schools now are using Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter themselves to promote the work that's going on in the schools. Some even have, strong social media presence. So just, ask. I think our ethical standards quite often say if you have a question, go and inquire about it, learn a little bit more. And so, I would say if you're a practitioner and you're a little hesitant about this, talk to one of your administrators and find out what their comfort level is. It doesn't mean you can be told no flat out, and I love the suggestions you said about, open up an account that maybe is just very professional and only tweets professional work, and keep a personal account for the fun things that you want to do and sort of keep them separate. Or if you're, involved with your state leadership or association, offer to manage one of their social media accounts where it comes from, sort of a group message, and then maybe avoid tweeting during the day or being online too frequently, and just follow their rules or guidelines that are set out as well.
I think that can be that can be one really powerful way to advance the message that we know is so important. And I just think that again, we're small but mighty. And so when we band together and we say, no, this is what's best for children, I think that we amplify a message that's really critical. There's a reason that NASP really makes an influence on public policy. There's a reason that we're contacted when they're starting to craft legislation. I'm now a co-chair of the GPR committee, and I am shocked about how many times we're contacted by lawmakers to say, hey, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on early childhood mental health intervention? And we get to be a part of that conversation, but I can't help but think part of it is because the messages that we're putting out from NASP are so positive and important, and people see, we'd really like to know what those experts have to say. So again, don't be afraid to just get in there. Again, start with retweeting.
And as you can tell, we're pretty passionate about the topic, and we could probably talk for hours on it, but we developed an advocacy social media guide that is on the NASP website. If you just go on our main page and under advocacy, you'll find that social media guide, and it's, just jam-packed with wonderful advice, information, probably answers all the questions that you asked, and maybe even goes in depth a little bit more. So
yeah, and the other place I would recommend going is that we also have a policy blog, an advocacy policy blog that somebody's posting on all the time. And so if you're kind of wondering, hey, what are those issues that are happening at the national level that I should care about? Know that that's a great place to go, and you're going to see a lot of good messaging that's coming out, and that would be something that would be really important to share out as well.
Yeah, those sound like terrific resources.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anything else that you'd like to add that we didn't get to?
Just follow us on Twitter. Mine is Dr._Faustino.
And mine is at Carrie Oyen, Karioyen. And again, we want to be a part of the conversation. And so anytime that you can think of a way to amplify our message, if there's something that's really important to you that you're seeing in your local school district that you'd really like to bring out, certainly tag us, certainly do the hashtags we talked about today, and let's get that message amplified to decision makers, and let's try to make a little difference, because I do think that we are, and I do think that our message is important. And so thank you for having us on this podcast. We like to have a lot of fun. Now, if you do follow us, you're going to notice that on Twitter. We have a lot of fun. We like to laugh. But we also know that our message is just really critical to advancing mental health for children.
Absolutely. Thank you for engaging in the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
That concludes this Dialogues podcast. Please tune in again for future Dialogue podcasts available on the NASP website.